Hey Team YouTube, got a active air suspension to a passive strut and spring suspension for the following model years of vehicles from Suncore Industries. Here's what you get: a strut and a spring, and let's take a look at these in real life. Here is the old spring that gets used with one of the airbag type struts. Here is the new spring, much thicker wire, and got a strut just waiting to go there. Yeehaw! Let's take a look at the setup on the car. Alright, looking from the tire in, I got a jack on the A-arm, and then I've got a jack stand here on a looks to be a fairly intact piece of that's galvanized or galvannealed frame member there. And let's go ahead and pull this off and get started on the wheel. Okay guys, there's some directions in the provided documentation. I'm going to tell you what worked for me and where this diverges from the directions. So starting out, we got the wheel off now. Remove the wheel cover, the lug nuts, take the tire off. Of course, safety first as always. Things like, don't date women with tattoos of daggers on their bodies. Always a good step. Here is the existing spring, the smaller gauge wire that makes this spring. And here is the air strut. And there is the air line that feeds it, though that's all going away. The jack is positioned under the A-arm, and I've got it compressed a little bit. First thing we're going to do is release the top bolts on the strut and lower it down. What we don't want to do is the brake line here. We don't want to stress that brake line going down to the wheel cylinder. In the trunk, looking back here towards that area there, have the carpet pulled back to get to the top of the strut tower. There are two nuts in there. Trust me on this. We'll go ahead and get those removed right now. Got a 15mm socket. Here we go. Looky. That's where one is right there right now. Just got the wrench hanging out so you can see it. Okay, there's the ratchet on the one that's farthest aft. So I figure this is a boat. We should call it aft and below decks and mizzenmast. So get that other one off too. And that's what you remove. So these things, they don't loosen up until they're practically all the way off because they're that formed thread or whatever it is. So, it's not difficult. Just stay with it. All right, two nut bolt combos. One down here, one up here. This is right on. Here's the brake drum to give you a perspective. Got to loosen those up, pull them out. Still got the jack, so we're going to have a controlled descent of the A-arm so we don't stress out the brake line. Alright Team YouTube, 24mm on the nut. This one is totally accessible, free and clear, just with a regular socket and a little battery impact. By the way, do yourself a favor, if you're ever going to fix cars, anything, get yourself some sort of impact wrench. Don't try to do it the Armstrong way. Okay Team YouTube, for the next step, you're going to need one of these bolt type spring compressors, not the external spring compressors that you might use if you're trading out a front strut and coil spring. So one of the tips they say is that you can see how the bolts here are off center, that when you hook this thing in, that you want to hook the one with the higher bolt to the higher part of the spring and then the lower one to the lower part of the spring. At least that's the way I interpret it. The idea is you want to keep the bolt fairly straight and square down the axis of the coil spring. This takes some doing, and honestly, if you just drop the A-arm down far enough, you might be able to just yank this sucker out. I was almost able to do that. I just needed a little something, but I'm going to show this is the right way. By the way, I already did the other wheel and I made a lot of mistakes in terms of taking extra time and doing things wrong. This is a way I think is going to work better for everybody. Okay, spring is loose. It's going to come out, and I ended up going ahead and taking out the bolts on the lower strut. And here is the sway bar, anti-sway bar, hanging loose. So here we go. The spring is out of the car now. And there it is. Don't forget to pull out the spring there on the air line and disconnect the air line and put it aside. And with the lower bolts removed, the strut is now out. We just have a stray air line that we have to tie back. I'm going to duct tape mine to the new strut just in case something ever changes where you might want the air back and spend all that money to fix it. Here is the new spring, compressed a fair amount. We're going to see if this is enough. If not, we'll tighten it up a little more. So the way I'm doing it is this rubber hose is on the top of the spring, what I'm calling the top of the spring. This is going to go up this bottom side with the plain spring end is going to go on the A-arm down below, and of course the threaded rod from the spring compressor is going to go through the hole in the A-arm. So let's go ahead and put it in there and get after it. Alright team, don't forget you got your rubber boots at the bottom and there's a rubber boot up at the top. I try to position the spring end so it kind of matches up with the old spring. However, in my rubber boot below, I wasn't real happy with that because it looked like the spring end was actually riding off the rubber boot onto the metal, so I rotated it about 90 degrees just to make sure that the end of the spring, if you can see it right there, is still fully on the rubber boot. And spring compressor in, I confess, I used an impact to tighten that sucker up. I don't think it's against the rules to do that in terms of safety, but next thing I'm going to go ahead and rough in, make sure I can get the new strut in, and then I'm going to call an assistant to get that top of the strut tower nuts put in, because I don't have arms that long. Let's see what happens. Alright, the kid unit came out. Now the strut's up in the strut tower. Got the two nuts on, we have them loose, not snug, so we can still move the thing around a little bit. Probably could move them around with it tight too, but prefer to have everything loose, just kind of rough it all in. Alright, here's the catch. You got two holes on the anti-sway bar end. That goes on the outside, then the metal flange, then the knuckle, and then the other flange. And we'll take a look at it once I get a nut through or a bolt through and go from there. Alright Team YouTube, I'm not going to BS you here. Trying to get off that threaded rod in there is essentially 1/8 of a turn at a time. It's going to take a while, and then you're going to have to finagle the jaw parts of the spring compressor here to get it to go right. I'm sorry, let's get a little more light on that subject. There we go. Going to finagle these to get them out. You can drop the threaded rod down the bottom hole, of course that's where it's been, and then just try to pull the parts out the side of the spring. I'll see you on the flip side. And the spring tool is out. So, pro tip, the bolts there, if you can't get this thing out, loosen the bolts and drop the hooks out as needed. That's what I ended up having to do, and worked real good. So this tool is definitely the MVP of this particular repair. Couldn't have done it without it. Okay, while we're on it, the directions from Suncore Industries say to drop the A-arm. That would mean loosening the two bolts back there. Those are extraordinarily rusted, the nut to the bolt, and there's just no way. And doing it the way I did it, provided there's enough room and you can get enough compression on the spring, there's no reason to drop the A-arm. The other thing they say is to drop the sway bar, and again, if I just touch those sway bar links, I mean, they're rusty. It's still working good and the rubber bushing is still there and everything, but trying to get that apart and back together without destroying it, not going to take that chance. And everything went good in the meantime. Yes, it was a little awkward with the sway bar being in the way, but it's flexible and you can move it as needed. So the spring is now in. I'm going to tighten up all the fasteners for the shock here, strut, whatever it is, and we're going to drop this car and measure the ride height and make sure it's all right. Alright guys, on the strut tower, took the air line, and I'm just going to put a big old piece of Gorilla Tape on it. I kind of got the end sealed up again, just to, if there's any reason you need to save the air line. Alright, so that's that. Let's go ahead and put her on the ground.